And this is our lead story. Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un have made history by becoming the first sitting US and North Korean leaders to meet and shake hands. The handshake at a luxury hotel in Singapore came before they sat down for a meeting that appeared unthinkable only a few months ago. And then the two nuclear-armed foes appeared on the verge of conflict as Kim conducted nuclear and missile tests and the two leaders slung personal insults at each other. For North Korea, the talks are hugely significant, as standing beside the US president is an enormous step towards ending decades of international isolation. But it remains far from clear if North Korea is willing to give up its nuclear weapons. And if it agrees to, the US may be willing to offer security guarantees, normalization of relations, sanctions relief, as well as economic aid. So for more on this extraordinary meeting, we are crossing now to Patrick Falk in Hong Kong. Good morning, Patrick.
Very good morning to you.
Patrick, first and foremost, so what is the latest coming from that meeting between Kim Jong-un and Donald Trump?
Well, the latest, as far as Singapore is concerned, is that the face-to-face between the two leaders seemed to go very well indeed, and the president did tweet as well that the relationship was excellent. As far as China is concerned, the foreign ministry has issued a statement to say that the world is watching very closely to this summit, and that it's also hopeful for a positive outcome. It also noted the pivotal role it played in bringing these talks, which, as you say, a few months ago seemed impossible, into fruition. Now, that also gives us a sense of to what extent China's objectives are intertwined with these talks. And of course, we know that China wants US troops to move off the Korean peninsula. But if that's not on the table, the question is whether or not an offer to lift economic sanctions or for economic support or even promises of security is going to be enough to convince Kim Jong-un to put down North Korea's nuclear weapons. And no doubt Beijing would have conveyed to North Korea what it wants as a bare minimum in exchange for its support of North Korea. And as we know, it relies very heavily on its closest ally for political and economic support.
And Patrick, do we know in terms of substantive issues what exactly was discussed there in Singapore?
Well, there's very little by way of detail just at the moment, but certainly the tone seems to have been positive between the two leaders. It was interesting that the US Secretary of Defense was involved in the group meeting that took place immediately afterwards. Of course, this was an idea that North Korea had really bristled against, but it won't be long before we do find out more about what was discussed exactly. After all, North Korea's Kim Jong-un is scheduled to return to North Korea at 2 p.m. This afternoon. They are having lunch very soon, or they may already be having lunch already. So more details will be emerging very soon indeed.
Patrick, we saw what happened over the weekend at the G7 meeting, and I think many people hoping that this would be much more of a positive resolution to this particular meeting. What sense are you getting at this time?
Well, there has been talk that all these strong words that came out of the US president was meant to show North Korea that it meant business. China, of course, has been playing that up and contrasted the negative tone that came out of the G7 summit with its own Shanghai Cooperation Organization gathering, which took place in Qingdao. The media in China really has focused in that. The Global Times of China, as I've mentioned before, also noted that any deal that were to take place between North Korea and South Korea on a potential peace deal must involve China as well. It's made clear that as one of the signatories to the armistice that it must be involved.
And if for some reason China does not feature in that deal, is there any indication of how China would react to that?
Well, there has been some talk about what Kim Jong-un's intentions are exactly, but what we do know is that relations between North Korea and China have certainly improved in recent months. They had been strained over the past year after China went along with the global sanctions against the country. And as we've seen, there have been these mysterious talks taking place between the leaders of China and North Korea over the past few months, and that's raised concern for Donald Trump as well, that China is behind the scenes pulling the strings. So it's hard to see China not getting something out of this, perhaps not the removal of troops from the Korean Peninsula, but these have also been very much intertwined with some of the trade talks that have been ongoing with the US. So there are things or indicators that we could see further down the line which would benefit China in the long run.
Well, Patrick, thanks for that update. That is our correspondent in Beijing, Patrick Fock. Now,